The day I gave birth should have been the happiest of my life. Instead, my in-laws handed me divorce papers. They had no idea who they were dealing with. If you've ever been underestimated, talked down to, or made to feel like you didn't belong in a room, stay right here until the very end. This story is for you. And if it moves you the way I think it will, hit that like button right now, because what I'm about to share has never been told before. Not like this. My name is Adaze, and before I tell you what happened in that hospital room, I need you to understand who I was before any of it, because that context is everything. I grew up in Houston, Texas, the daughter of a Nigerian immigrant father who worked double shifts as a pharmacist and a mother who taught elementary school for 23 years with a smile that never looked tired. They raised me to be two things above all else: capable and quiet. Not quiet in a small way, quiet in the way that a river is quiet before it reaches the falls. They taught me that the most powerful thing a woman can carry is information that no one knows she has. I became a neonatal nurse, not because it was easy, Lord knows it wasn't, but because something about holding the smallest, most fragile lives in my hands made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I worked at a level 4 NICU in Atlanta. I had my own apartment, a beat-up Honda that I loved more than any luxury car I'd ever been inside, and a routine that was entirely, peacefully mine. I dressed simply. I wore little jewelry. I drove myself to work. My colleagues knew me as the nurse who remembered every baby's name long after they'd been discharged and who brought jollof rice to every department potluck without being asked. Nobody at that hospital knew anything about my past. And that was entirely by design. Because here's the thing about starting over. It only works if you commit to it completely. I met Daewon on a Tuesday afternoon in a bookstore of all places. He was reaching for the same novel I had been hunting for 3 weeks, a Korean literary fiction translation that had sold out everywhere online. We both had our hands on it at the same time. He laughed first. I laughed second. We stood in that aisle for 40 minutes talking about books, about Atlanta, about the strange feeling of being far from where you started. He was warm in a way that disarmed me. Not flashy, not performing. He worked in urban planning for the city, had a small apartment 20 minutes from mine, and cooked Korean food badly but enthusiastically. On our third date, he made doenjang jjigae that was so oversalted I had to drink 2 full glasses of water, and the whole time he watched my face with this nervous, hopeful expression that made me feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time: safe. We dated for 8 months before I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the edge of my bathtub, holding that test for a long time. I won't pretend I wasn't scared. I was terrified, but somewhere underneath the fear was something solid, a knowing. So I called Daewon. He was at my apartment within 20 minutes. He sat down next to me on that bathroom floor, took my hand, and said, "Whatever you want, we figure out together." We got married at the courthouse 3 weeks later. 2 witnesses, a bouquet of sunflowers I'd grabbed from the grocery store, and dinner afterward at a Korean barbecue spot where the smoke alarms kept going off, and we laughed until we cried. It was the most honest day of my life. He mentioned his parents occasionally, that they lived in Seoul, that they traveled frequently for business, that the relationship was complicated. I didn't press him. Everyone has a complicated relationship with their parents. I understood that better than most. He said he would introduce us when the time was right. I believed him. I had no reason not to. The time, apparently, became right when I was 7 months pregnant and the size of a small planet. I came home from a 12-hour shift to find 2 people sitting in my living room. Mr. CO was tall, silver-haired, and dressed in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. Mrs. CO was immaculate. Pearls, a structured blazer, hair pulled back so tightly it looked like effort itself. They both stood when I walked in. Neither of them smiled. Daewon introduced us with this tight, careful energy I had never seen in him before. He looked like a man walking a tightrope. I shook both their hands, offered tea, moved to the kitchen to give everyone a moment to breathe. From the kitchen, I could hear Mrs. SEO speaking in Korean, low and fast. I caught enough to understand the shape of the conversation even if I didn't let on. I stood at the stove with my back to the room and let the kettle boil. Dinner that evening was polite the way a minefield is polite. Everything looked fine until you took a wrong step. Mrs. SEO asked about my family background with the tone of someone conducting an immigration interview. Mr. Seo asked Daewon, in English, deliberately, what my long-term career plans were, as though I wasn't sitting 3 feet away carrying their grandchild. At one point, Mrs. Seo looked at my stomach and said something to her husband in Korean that I chose not to translate in that moment. I smiled instead. I poured more tea. I asked if anyone wanted dessert. I had learned a long time ago that there is enormous power in letting people believe they are invisible when you can see them perfectly. Before they left that night, Mr. Seo asked to speak with Daewon privately. They went out to the hallway. I cleared the dishes. When Daewon came back inside, something in his eyes had shifted. He hugged me for a long time without saying anything. I held him back and said nothing either. Sometimes silence between two people says everything. 2 weeks before my due date, the baby decided she was ready. I want to tell you that labor was beautiful and cinematic, but honestly, it was 31 hours of the hardest physical work I have ever done in my life. And I say that as someone who once worked 6 consecutive overnight shifts. Daewon was there for all of it, holding my hand, getting yelled at, apologizing for things that weren't his fault, fetching ice chips with the dedication of a man who understood that this was the most important assignment of his life. And then she arrived, Suyona Daisy Seo, 6 pounds, 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that looked at me like they already knew me. I held her against my chest, and I felt the entire world reorganize itself around that moment. Daewon was crying. I was crying. Even the attending nurse was blinking hard. For 1 hour, maybe the most perfect hour of my life, nothing else existed. Then visiting hours opened. Daewon stepped out to make calls. I was alone with Suyeon, exhausted and completely at peace when the door opened. I expected a nurse. Instead, Mrs. Seo walked in, alone. No Daewon, no Mr. Seo. Just her, in another immaculate outfit, holding a manila envelope. She set it on the bedside table, right next to my water cup and my daughter's bassinet. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as businesslike. Then she said, in perfect English, the first time she had spoken to me directly in English, "This is the cleanest solution for everyone." And she left. I looked at that envelope for a long moment before I opened it. Inside were divorce papers, already signed by Daewon. There was a cover letter from a family lawyer named Attorney Park, written on heavy cream stationery. It explained that the SEO family was prepared to offer me a generous settlement and assisted housing in exchange for my cooperation, and that primary custody of Suyeon would transfer to Daewon under the guidance and supervision of his parents. I read every word twice. Then I folded the papers back into the envelope. Then I looked at my daughter, who was sleeping with her fist pressed against her cheek, completely unaware that her grandmother had just tried to erase her mother from her life before she was even 24 hours old. And something in me went completely, dangerously calm. The kind of calm that only comes when you have already survived the worst thing and you absolutely know that this is not it. Daewon did not come back to the hospital that night. Attorney Park arrived the following morning with the energy of a man who had done this before, walked into rooms with vulnerable women, and walked out with signatures. He was polished, unhurried, and spoke to me with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone explaining something complicated to someone simple. He slid a revised offer across the tray table, $50,000, a 1-bedroom apartment in a modest part of the city. Supervised visitation, my visitation of my own daughter, supervised. He said, "We want to make this as comfortable as possible for you." He said, "This is a fresh start." He smiled like he was doing me a favor. I asked for 48 hours to consider. He agreed immediately, generously, with the confidence of a man who had never once considered that the answer might be no. After he left, I asked my nurse to close the door. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to a contact I had not called in over 2 years. I stared at the name for a moment. Then I pressed call. The line rang twice before it picked up. I spoke in Korean, fluent, unhurried, formal. I said, "Hyunjae, I need to tell you something, and then I need to ask you for one favor." There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice, deep, measured, carrying the particular calm of someone who had spent decades making decisions that moved markets, said, "Adiz, tell me. I imagine this is the moment you need context. Before Atlanta, before the Honda and the neonatal ward and the jollof rice potlucks, before the bookstore and Daewon and sunflowers at a courthouse. Before all of it, I was someone else, not a different person. The same soul, the same values my parents gave me, but in a different world entirely." At 24, I was a postgraduate student in Seoul on a research fellowship in public health. I was sharp, curious, and completely unprepared unprepared for the life that was about to find me. I met Kwon Hyun-jae at a formal dinner hosted by the university. He was on the board of a foundation that funded the fellowship. He was 31, composed, and the most intentional person I had ever encountered. We spoke for a long time about healthcare inequality in West Africa. He asked questions that showed he had actually thought about the answers. I was not impressed by his name or his money. I hadn't known either when we met, but I was deeply impressed by his mind. We courted slowly, married privately. For 3 years, I was Mrs. Kwon, a role that came with a level of wealth, influence, and visibility I had never sought and never entirely adjusted to. I loved him. I believe he loved me, but we wanted different futures. He was building a dynasty. I wanted to help one baby breathe at a time. Neither of us was wrong. We parted without bitterness, with deep mutual respect, and with a settlement that I deposited into accounts nobody knew existed and never spoke of again. I left Seoul and made a deliberate choice to disappear into a life that was entirely mine. Not Mrs. Kwon, not the former wife of one of the most powerful men in South Korea's luxury real estate and international hospitality world. Just a Dais, nurse, woman, human being who wanted to be known for what she did with her hands, not what she had once signed her name to. Chairman Kwon Hyun-jae and I had remained, quietly and at a respectful distance, something close to friends. Not romantic, not complicated, just two people who had shared something real and chosen to honor it with honesty afterward. When I called him from that hospital room, I was not asking him to fight for me. I was asking him to witness. There is a difference. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I never want it to be misunderstood as revenge. It wasn't. It was simply the natural consequence of the truth finally occupying the space where a lie had been living. Within 24 hours of my phone call, a major hospitality development group based in Singapore, one that held contracts worth hundreds of millions with the SEO family's construction and property business, requested what they called an urgent contractual review. Meetings were postponed. Emails went unreturned. Invitations to an annual industry summit in Hong Kong, invitations the SEO family had received without question for 11 consecutive years, quietly did not arrive. Mr. Seo began making calls to colleagues who suddenly had scheduling conflict. Mrs. Seo rang Attorney Park 3 times in one afternoon. Attorney Park, to his credit, finally did the one thing he should have done before he ever walked into my hospital room with that offer. He typed my full name into a search engine. I was told later, by someone who was there, that he sat completely still in front of his screen for a very long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Mrs. SEO and said 4 words: "We have a problem." I was discharged from the hospital on a Thursday. I went home to my apartment with my daughter, my mother, who had flown in from Houston and was already reorganizing my kitchen with the focused energy of a woman who processes worry through action, and a clarity I had not felt in months. I called Gloria Mensa on Friday morning. If you have ever needed a lawyer and found the right one, you know the particular relief of that first conversation, the feeling of a door opening into a room where the air is different. Gloria was a Ghanaian-American family law attorney with 20 years of experience, a voice like carved mahogany, and absolutely zero tolerance for what she called the theater of the powerful. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Good. Now let me tell you what we're going to do. We were not going to fight over money. I had no interest in their money. I had more money than they could have imagined sitting quietly in accounts they would never find. And even if I hadn't, this was never about money. What I wanted was simple and I think profound. I wanted 3 things: full primary custody of Soo-yeon with structured visitation for Daiwan and Daiwan alone, not his parent, not their lawyers, not anyone else they sent as a proxy. A formal written apology from Mrs. SEO, signed, notarized, and placed in a document that my daughter could read on her 18th birthday if she chose to. And a legal agreement that permanently removed the SEO grandparents from any decision-making authority over my daughter's life. Attorney Park received Gloria's terms on a Monday. I was told the SEO family's initial response was disbelief. Then, as the full picture of their business situation continued to quietly unfold around them, the disbelief gave way to something more cooperative. Daewon came to see me on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the hospital. He knocked. I opened the door. He looked like a man who had not slept properly in all that time. And when he saw Soo-yeon in my arms, something in his face broke open in a way I recognized. It was the same expression he'd had in the bookstore, reaching for that novel, wanting something he wasn't sure he deserved. deserved. He came inside. We sat at my kitchen table. He told me that his parents had threatened to cut him off completely if he didn't comply, that they had convinced him it was the responsible thing, that they had told him I would be well taken care of, and that the baby would have a better life with their resources behind her. He told me he had signed the papers at a restaurant table while his father watched and his mother checked her phone. He said he had told himself it was the right thing every hour since, and that he had not believed it for a single minute. I let him finish. I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "You signed divorce papers in a restaurant while I was in labor. We are finished. That chapter is closed. But that little girl in the next room is not a chapter. She is the whole rest of the story, and she still has a father if you decide to be one. That choice is entirely yours." He cried at my kitchen table. I got up to check on Suyan. It has been 9 months since that night. Suyan is pulling herself up on furniture now, deeply offended that her legs are not yet cooperating with her ambitions, and it is the most magnificent thing I have ever watched. My mother flies in every 6 weeks and spoils her without apology. Day one comes every other weekend. Just him, just my daughter, a father learning how to show up in the only way that actually counts. I am back at the NICU. Some mornings I walk in and a new family is huddled around an incubator, terrified and hopeful in equal measure, and I pull up a chair and sit with them, and I think, this is what I came back for. This is the life I chose. The Kwan Foundation quietly funds a maternal health initiative in Atlanta now, supporting Black women through high-risk pregnancies. I consult for it 2 evenings a week. Chairman Kwan and I exchanged exactly 4 texts when it launched. His last one said simply, "You always knew what mattered." I didn't respond for a day. Then I sent back a photo of Suyan asleep with her fist on her cheek. He replied with one word, "Perfect." Mrs. CO's written apology sits in a white envelope inside a cedar box in my daughter's closet. I don't know if Suyan will want to read it when she's 18. I don't know if she'll want to know all of this story or just parts of it. But it will be there because my daughter deserves to know that her mother never let anyone decide what she was worth and that she held them accountable with paperwork, not anger. The day they handed me those divorce papers, they thought they were ending something. They were actually beginning it. They assumed that a tired woman, alone in a hospital bed, holding a newborn and a devastating surprise, would fold. They looked at me and calculated weakness. They saw a nurse in a hospital gown with no family in the room and thought, "She has nothing." What they didn't understand, what they never stopped to consider, is that the woman who chooses to live quietly is not the woman who has nothing. She is the woman who has everything she needs and no interest in proving it to you until the moment it matters. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Every person who has ever been handed a situation designed to break them and refused to break, this one is for you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because I promise you, the next one is just as extraordinary, and I'll see you there.